Welcome to the Hamingja Podcast. This episode has no number, since it's a bit outside the regular program. It's a Yule special together with Michael from the YouTube channel Norse Magic and Beliefs. I'm really happy to have him on, because one of the very reasons I even started this podcast was because I had written really long comments on his YouTube videos, trying to elaborate on those topics, and my comments seemed to be appreciated among the viewers and readers. So I thought, why not create something that anyone can benefit from? We had some questions in the Hamingja Discord server, and decided to have a very spontaneous talk to answer some of your questions. And if you want to join the Discord server, you'll find it on the contact page on hamingja.foundation. Unfortunately, we realized after the recording that OBS, the program for recording Discord conversations, hadn't really been with us this day. It was fighting us a bit, so my voice is distorted, while Michael sounds just fine. So you gotta have some extra Yule beer and bear with us. Before we go on to the talk, I just want to say that this time of year has always been about longing for the light to return for all Indo-European peoples. This is the darkest hour, our most fragile moment, a time when the veil between life and death, between downfall and survival, is the thinnest. It is life at its core, a balance. This is the eternal battle between to be or not to be. This is Ragnarök. The ancestors are waiting for sunlight to enter their graves on winter solstice, to awaken them and give them life back. And that's why the graves were built the way they were, to let sunshine in the realm of the dead. All of nature is waiting for the sign to start to grow again, and we're waiting for Balder to return. We are waiting for Persephone to come back from the dead and release spring. The winter spirits are fighting the summer spirits. Everybody's holding their breath. Will we be reborn? The winter solstice and Yule tide has always been downtime. It's a time to be together, a time for reflection, a time to realize that we reap what we sow. And a chain isn't stronger than its weakest link. So give each other time and presence. Give each other care. And give each other gifts. Gifts that create bonds. Gifts that give life. And gifts that make people remember themselves. 'Cause I remember the shining sanguine sun, the frozen forests and fallen leaves, and the hollow hill under the sky. I remember the coming of man reborn, the birth of Balder the Bright, the return of a world that was woefully lost. I want to wish you a god jul and gott nytt år. And mind you, it's the birth of the sun, not the sun. Welcome to the Yule special, and today I have with me Michael from Norse Magic and Beliefs. Welcome, Michael.
Thank you for having me. It's good to finally speak. It's been a long time.
Yeah. How are you today? Or tonight, I should say. You're in LA,
good,
right?
Good. We struggled a bit, so it's a bit later than it was supposed to be. But yeah, I'm up here. It's one in the morning. What is it? It's almost 10 there, isn't it now? Isn't it?
It's 10 o'clock, yes, in the morning. A very grey and gloomy Scandinavia. Classic winter in southern Sweden.
Yeah. Snow yet?
No snow. We haven't had any snow at all.
yeah. It's
Which
cold here too.
I'm
It's
actually happy about that because I don't like the snow.
yeah. No snow here. It's a bit cold.
How
It's about
Christmassy are
15.
the palm trees in
They
California?
I have to admit they decorate much better for Christmas here. The lights and the just celebrations and the music, they decorate much better than anywhere in Europe, I think.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. I actually am looking out the window and I just see dull houses and no fun stuff at all.
Yeah,
So you should be happy.
yeah. That's how it goes, I guess.
We are here today to talk about what the Christians call Christmas and what we actually call Yule. And we've had a few questions on our Discord server about Yule and the Yule celebrations. So I thought we'd go through those. We have 6 questions today.
Yeah.
And I think initially I'll go through what Yule really was and what the pagans call Ragnarök.
Yep. Yeah, you know more about that than me. I'd like to. I know, like, I've read some theories about it. Because a lot of it's reconstructed, of course, based on a lot of good evidence. But then I've seen them take a lot of some of the Celtic influence too. We might not have the sources for that in like the Norse or Germanic paganism, but we have Celtic sources, and I think that's what they've done is combine the two. When they reconstruct, but yeah, you know more about that than me. I'd love to get your thoughts.
Yeah. So, I mean, what we do know is that all indigenous people have always celebrated the winter solstice and the midwinter, and it actually started way before Yule, before the Yule tide. And so men weren't allowed to cut their hair, their beards, or nails from Halloween until after winter had been killed, so to say, because this was all about killing winter. So you weren't allowed to cut any hair until after Yuletide. And because if you did, that meant disaster for everything that grows in nature.
Yeah,
So
yeah. A bit of a little example of kind of sympathetic magic. You just
exactly,
let your
exactly.
let your stuff and hair grow so that the nature can still grow again.
Exactly. You wanted
Since
everything that grows to grow, since this was the darkest period of the year. So the 24th or the 25th day of Hamingja, Yuletide began with a celebration of the solstice. The burial mounds were built so that on that day, the sunlight could enter the grave chamber and light it up, and waking up the elves or their ancestors, just like Freyr had woken up the seeds in the ground when he sent the sunbeams to propose to Gerder or Gerd. The people in the village, they took out the things the elves or the ancestors had in the grave with them, and they gave those things to the living as a gift from the ancestors. Things they thought to have owned themselves in previous lives. And at that time, everyone should leave their doors unlocked on the winter solstice to make it possible for Heimdallr to enter the home. And they also put a bowl of porridge on the front step, so he didn't have to travel on an empty stomach. And it was Heimdallr who delivered those gifts from the elves to the kids that night. And that was only those who had earlier in the year who had dared to enter the grave, because that was a rite de passage. What do you say, like a passage ritual?
yeah, rite of passage. I think I heard
Rite
that.
of passage. That's right. The tradition was also to use 7 kinds of wood in the fire that night, and you had to eat meat from animals associated with fertility, such as the boar, of course, and that's why we have the Yule tradition with ham.
Yep, yep.
You had to sleep on the floors to let the elves sleep in your beds. The days around Yule, the elves then traveled between the villages, led by Heimdallr, Loki, Skadi, Thor, and Odin, and they together were fighting the spirits of winter. And together, the people of the village also dressed up in white, because elves actually means white. And they were ritualistically riding and fighting the spirits of winter to make the sun come back. And the final battle between the summer spirits against the winter spirits was Ragnarök, which means the winter solstice, or in some tribes, also the new year. So, sorry, what were you saying?
Yeah, I was just saying it's lots of things that I haven't really heard all that together at once. But everything you say, I like remembering it from some place or another. It's oh, that's from a folk tale here. Oh, this is from an old saga, and this is from like an old Celtic tale. It's like pretty much like I'm hearing things over the period of 2,000 years almost
Oh yeah,
that has little parts of that, but maybe as an original, what it originally was, it included that all together, like you said, and it kind of
yeah.
separated. So how far back do you think this goes, if you had to guess?
I mean, the problem with me is that my expertise is actually the Proto-Indo-Europeans, which goes back like 9,000 years. So most things I know are actually that old. And to be honest, I think because I know that the Proto-Indo-Europeans celebrated winter solstice in a similar way. I know that for a fact. So I think these things, I mean, at least the symbolism of it is that old. Then, of course, these things have changed over time too. But the symbolism is definitely that old.
Yeah, yep.
So to continue, Hörður, the bear and wolf deity, was this evening called Fenrir, as the Fenrir wolf. And he attacked on the evening of Ragnarök to fight Odin and the other gods and the ancestors and the summer spirits. And all those powers and forces go to war against each other. Fenrir kills Odin, Thor kills Jörmungandr, the light god Freyr fights darkness itself, that means Surtur, the black one, but he dies. Loki and Heimdallr, they kill each other. Tyr, or Tiwaz, fights the mighty dog guarding the entrance to hell, and they too kill each other. The adults of the village now are dressed up in white and black, 50-50, to ritually fight each other as a symbolism of winter and summer. So the army of summer is armed with torches, and the army of winter, they throw ash, which of course means death. Ragnarök is not the twilight of the gods, but rather the renewal and purification of them. And the day after Ragnarök, it was called Eldbjörg, meaning the fire rescue. This was the final day of Yule. And then they drank a toast to the sun, like a libation, and rejoiced because they had now saved the sun, Balder or Apollo. The lady of the house walked 3 times around the house, anti-clockwise, which I'm not used to because I'm not normally study the Proto-Indo-Europeans. They always do everything clockwise.
Yeah,
But
I
in this
wanted
case, it
to
was
ask you about that too, but we can save that for later in the.
we've actually spoken about that before, because I see that in Norse tradition, a lot of things are done anti-clockwise. Can you say something about that?
Yeah, everything. The record of it that we have going back to pagan times, we have a couple of magic rituals when Verva would, the most famous one, I think it's Gettir saga, where she was basically placing a curse on a tree stump, so that I forget who it was. It was some man, but then he comes and he chops the tree with his axe, but then the axe falls into him to kill him. So she walked counterclockwise to do that. But then we find it literally dozens of times in the folk tradition, anywhere from the 1300s up until the 1900s. People were still doing this. Even today, when we walk around the Christmas tree, we're still doing this thing counterclockwise.
Okay, yeah.
And there are a few reasons for that, which I just released a video for a couple days ago. But it's basically to waken up the spirits that are inside the circle, and also to kind of summon the spirits that are passing by, kind of like a whirlpool effect, to spin it around and around, so the spirits are staying there. And these kinds of things are done all over the world too. But I've only ever read counterclockwise. That is, I guess in the East, do they do a more clockwise movement?
That is interesting, because what you said about waking up something, I think that's the key here, because the original Proto-Indo-European ideal was always clockwise, because that was actually working with the chartus, or the flow of everything. So because for them that was normal, since the sun actually goes clockwise. So for them, when you're working with the flow, you always do things clockwise. But for something to wake up, that actually might need to walk anti-clockwise. Maybe that's the key here.
Yeah. So maybe if it's something that they believed that they wanted to kind of keep it going the way it was, then they would go clockwise. But if they kind of wanted to disturb it a little bit from what is natural, then maybe counterclockwise.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, yeah, makes sense.
So the ending of this was that on that final day, the lady of the house, she walks 3 times around the house anti-clockwise with a wand of juniper, which was a tree dedicated to Odin, to send the elves, or the ancestors, back to where they had come from. So it's to send them back into the grave where the sun and the sunlight was now coming in. She then drank beer and then threw the rest into the fire, which is also very typically Indo-European, to throw something into the fire. The others sat down on the floor with their hands on their backs, and they tried to drink beer from a bowl placed on the floor. The more beer you managed to drink, the better for you, and the more luck, Hamingja, you would get the coming year. And if you spilled any beer, you weren't allowed to drink anymore.
Oh, that's too bad for me.
Did you spill a lot of beer tonight?
No, not tonight, but it will be next week.
So then there was the procession with all the people in the farm from the village, and they walked from farm to farm with these torches that they had used in the war the night before, as symbols of the cleansing fire, and to throw out the last of the winter spirits. So that's basically what Ragnarök is, and what Yule and the winter solstice was about from the very beginning.
Yep. Very.
That was a long explanation.
Yep, that's all good. It's good to go into details, and lots of things, of course, you can recognize again. And these will kind of lead into people's questions, and they'll kind of. And I think
let's use that as a background for the questions that will come.
Yep. And I think most people listening, even if they have no knowledge at all, they will recognize some of those rituals that you just talked about, even if it's something completely new to them. They'll know it, like they've seen it before, or they've seen it in a folk tale, or they've seen it in a movie, something like that.
Exactly. So as far as I see things, Yule and the New Year, we'll come to that, because the New Year wasn't always the New Year everywhere in the pagan world. But as far as I see it, it was about chasing away darkness and becoming a better person yourself. For each year you become better and you learn from last year. I think this is also symbolized in the rune Jera.
Yeah.
So that was it. Maybe we should take some of the questions.
Yep, some questions.
Here we are. First question is, tell us something about the symbolism in Christmas that came from paganism.
Yeah, that's a long question.
Yeah, it's a big one.
It's easier to say what didn't come from paganism because that's a lot
Exactly.
less. Of course,
Exactly.
when you look at Christmas and all the traditions, it's I mean, these things are not from the Middle East. These traditions.
That's for sure.
So if it doesn't look like it came from, the Middle East where Christianity is from, it's probably original pagan European. But there's a few things we have, of course, sources for. There's the mistletoe, of course. That was always collected by the Druids at this time of year. Because of course, mistletoe being the thing that kills Balder, people believe that to be the thing that comes in and kills the light, the summer, and brings the cold and the dark in the winter. So the Druids would kind of pick the mistletoe so it brings down, because that was the only thing growing right in the winter when everything else dies. That and evergreen trees. Which of course we like to cut down and bring into our houses too. So those, of course, are the two main ones I think that most people will know and see why it comes from paganism.
Let me just cut in there that the old people always thought that mistletoe only grew on oak trees. And that's one of the reasons why the oak is so holy. And druid, since you mentioned that, actually means he who knows the oaks.
Huh.
So they were the ones working with the mistletoe and the oak.
Very cool. Yeah, yeah. Yeah, specifically oaks. They were. That's what their name means, right?
Yep,
Wow, very
exactly.
cool. Did not know that.
So Drew is the word. It can actually also mean that you're, what do you say, immersed in something. But normally, the Sanskrit word Drew is the oak, and wit is, of course, our word veta, to know something.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Yeah. And it's probably, of course, the same thing going far back, because it was the same thing in Rome. I know that the oak trees or oak groves were sacred, and the religious leaders were the ones who kind of presided over those groves and the trees. And I think it was, we have records of the same being done in Greece. So this that could absolutely be thousands of years old, long before the Vikings or the Druids.
Oh yeah. I mean, I do know once again that the Proto-Europeans, I always come back to them, but they celebrated these things 8, 9, 10, maybe, we don't know, maybe hundreds of thousands of years back. But yeah, so what we do know is that, of course, this was definitely not about Jesus and the celebrations of his birth. I think the reason they put I mean, the Romans, they had their Saturnalia or Saturnalia or whatever you call it.
Oh,
I think, since the Christians also developed among the Romans, they put that, of course, straight on top of their Saturnalia celebrations.
yeah, yeah.
And we do know that the first recorded Christmas celebration was in Rome 336 years after the birth of Christ. So, I mean, the pagans had celebrated this for thousands and thousands of years.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And
Was it around all the same time of year for the Romans too, and the Greeks, and going back to the Indo-Europeans?
yeah. So it was always, those celebrations were always around the winter solstice. I think that, I mean, since we know that the date of birth of Jesus was not at all around Christmas,
Yeah,
but because in the history writings in the ancient days, they always said that you were born the same day as you died. That's what they always wrote about people. So and since Jesus died on on Easter, it's quite sure that he was actually also born around like March, April, something like that. So this was just the Christians making something up, and they moved the whole celebration back several months.
Yeah, and we can see that with almost all holidays too. Almost every holiday that we have, even till today, even if it sounds Christian, it was most likely a pagan holiday that they just moved a slight bit and called it a different name. And there's actually records of kings and bishops and religious leaders like ordering the warriors or the governing bodies of an area to do this.
Exactly, and I mean the purpose, like I mentioned earlier about Ragnarok, is the purpose of the celebration is clear, that it's a returning of the light. So when we say the return of the sun, they actually just said the return of the sun, as in the child coming.
Yeah, okay.
You see what I mean?
Yeah, makes sense.
And since Jesus later was often described as the light in our lives, that was an easy way for Christians to just replace this light celebration by saying that Jesus is the light.
Yep. All makes sense. That's easy, easy to that. We can see how people were Christianized when they
exactly.
speak about it like that.
So if the pagans celebrated Balder and the white and shining one and the light coming back, and the sun, that was easy for the Christians to just say, okay, here comes the light, here comes the sun.
Yeah. Okay.
So do we have some more like concrete symbolism coming from paganism? I mean, some really concrete phenomena.
There is. You spoke about. I was thinking about this the other day. You were speaking about the ash, the covering the other side with ash during Christmas time, and I think there was also a tradition where they would cover kind of the kids with ash who wasn't ready to kind of be initiated into adulthood, into the tribe, and they'd cover them with ash, and then when they were of age, they would get their gift. And the ash, they are pretty sure that evolved into the Krampus, the German, like the evil Christmas kind of monster there.
Right. And we also know that because, I mean, once again, paganism is about nature, it's about life. It's not about bearded men on clouds. It's about life in all its simplicity. And like you said, there was a ritual saying that if the children at the age of 7 or 8, if they dared enter the grave and to go in to take the things from the ancestors, then at Christmas or Yule, they were allowed to celebrate, and they were actually becoming a real human being. And they also were given the gift from Heimdallr and Odin. And that's when they became a real human being at the age of 7 or 8. So that was actually also a celebration of becoming and of life. And I think a lot of these things go back to life, death, and giving birth. So I've heard that, for example, the red balls in the Christmas tree or the Yule tree was symbolizing the blood in the veins. And that the tree itself represents the placenta. Of course, the world tree, but if we take it down to the natural level, then it would be the placenta when you're giving birth.
Yeah, makes sense.
And in that case, the garland would be the umbilical cord. And the blood, light, and candy in the tree was the blood. And that was giving energy and food to the fetus. Okay, so we have the next question. Yule's ties to the wild hunt, to fertility, and the Anglo-Saxon Modernicht, or however that is pronounced.
Okay.
What do we have to say here? Ties
Yeah,
with wild hunt and fertility.
yeah. Well, let's split it up into three. That's
Yeah.
easier. Wild hunt is pretty. I mean, you see the what you spoke about just earlier about the hunt for the winter spirits. So the wild hunt, for those that don't know, we have kind of folk tales from all over Europe, really. Of course, Northern Europe, but even as far as Spain, about some kind of wild men going out around the solstice or the New Year, depending on which folk tale it is, and they're going out and really causing a disturbance, like stealing people's food and just causing a disturbance and scaring people. But they're thinking that that goes back again back to Indo-European times, to this kind of initiation ritual that. We can call them berserkers, but they would have been called Koryos Indo-European times. Did a long video on that, and they all kind of had the same tradition. It's young men that would go out in the wintertime hunting after things, and mostly wolves or dogs that were running wild on the outskirts of the settlements, and they were thrown out there naked, as of course as kind of an initiation ritual. We know that that happened, but how that exactly evolved into the folk tales of the Wild Hunt, or Odin's Hunt as it's sometimes called, we don't know exactly why, because they would have been, loved and respected in pagan times, but the folk tales we have of them are quite scary, and people viewed them as a menace almost.
What I find interesting is that what you just said, and also that this symbolical war, they were fighting against each other, and that could be actually really, really scary, and it was really like bad scenes going on. But the next day, they just took those clothes off and those masks off, and they just continued partying.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And here we also have, I mean, we have I mean, we shouldn't go ahead here, but the etymology of the word itself, I mean, one of the sources is that it comes from Yolnir, the long-bearded god Odin. When he comes in the wild hunt to the wild hunt, he is called Yolnir, the Yule one, he who comes at Yule.
Yeah,
So we
Yule Father, the Yule
yeah
Christmas Father, also one of his names.
yeah. So in the sources, when he comes at the wild hunt, his name is Yolnir and not Odin.
Hmm. Yeah, yeah.
Uh,
Yeah, anything else about the
So
Wild Hunt? Uh, don't think so.
yeah, well, there is the connection to death and life, etc., and that actually connects to the next part with the fertility and the Modranicht.
Yeah.
So maybe we'll proceed to that.
So the fertility one is easy.
Yep.
We have a few sources about that say that this was the time of year that there would be the fertility sacrifice of the first time of year, which would have been right around Halloween time in the Norse New Year or Germanic New Year, and that would be the sacrifice for good luck. And then at the beginning of the summer for victory, and then in the middle of the winter at Yule, it would be for good fertility, good crops, and good growth for the coming year. So, fertility definitely an important aspect of this part of the year. And like you said earlier about using the animals associated with fertility for the sacrifices and for the feasts, of course.
Yeah, no, I mean, if we know that this celebration is about the sun coming back, we also know that, of course, there's a battle between life and death in all of this. And I know that in the Greek tradition, I know that Demeter, or the goddess, was also called Tellus, like the Earth, Mother Earth. She was also celebrated at the winter solstice, and the Earth becoming fertile again. So this also is a link to the Modranicht, because that was a. Here we come into that. It was actually because what I've heard, the Disablut in the Norse tradition wasn't that celebrated later, like in February or something.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. And that was this leads straight into the Modernicht. I don't know much about it, but it's basically means the Mother's Night, and
Yeah.
we really don't have a lot of records. It's said that it was celebrated in Anglo-Saxon England, right, on the 25th of December.
Yeah.
I don't. That's kind of why I think that Modernicht was not Yule. It was something else. Because Yule would have been the next month. Um, and Modern seems to be a little bit earlier, and also the name. It's associated with like the mother, and like it would be associated with the Disir, which in the Norse world would be celebrated in February. So
Yeah.
it could be just something that the Anglo-Saxons did differently. They had their Yule too. That's why I think they probably had both. But instead of doing the Disabroot in Uppsala in February, like the Swedes did, for example, maybe the Anglo-Saxons did almost an exact similar thing for the similar purpose, but they chose to do it in December time. That's just my idea, but yeah, we can't be sure about that.
I mean, what we do know is that all Indo-European peoples, as they moved geographically, they also changed their traditions and the dates of things. So I think all of these things might be a mix of things, because we know that the Proto-Indo-European Day of the Dead, that's still celebrated today, and the winter solstice were actually like a fusion into Yule. So that became the celebration of light and the dead ancestors. So this is what they do, and same thing with Modernicht. I think that there's the connection to the Disablut, but it has changed the date.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Sure, and of course they can do that. It's people speak about how did the pagans celebrate this and that. Like the key kind of main holidays of the year and traditions would still be the same, but lots of other ones would be so easy to switch around. But I think we can say pretty sure that there were at least three that were pretty significant, no matter where we are in the Germanic world, at least. And that's the beginning of the year and midwinter and the beginning of the summer. They probably all celebrated.
Yeah, the same thing with the harvest festivals. That of course, if you wander south and you live more south than you used to do, of course the harvest is going to be later that year. You can harvest later that year, so of course you can also move the dates. And to be honest, to the early Indo-European peoples, I don't think that dates. I mean, it's not until the Roman Empire that dates are super important. They rather lived with nature and the earth.
And they for sure paid attention to the full moons. I think.
For sure, for sure.
I think everywhere would be full moon would be the key days to celebrate or do any type of spiritual ritual. But yeah, of course, they could move those around anytime they wanted, pretty much.
We also know that the Norse, they celebrated their matres or the matrons, and also the Norns at some point, possibly in connection with the Disablut. That would have been in February, but I think the Modranich was a mix of the Disablut and something else.
Yeah, yeah.
But it was definitely, since Yule was also about life coming back, there's a clear connection, of course.
Yep, yep.
What else do we have? Let's go on maybe to the etymology of Yule and the Santa Lucia Day.
Yep. Yeah,
here we have many possible answers.
Yeah. So what I was able to find is it could come from Yevla, Proto-Germanic, of course, and that meant festivity, celebration.
Yeah.
And then that could come from the Proto-Indo-European yek, which meant joke or play. But these are definitely not confirmed. That's just what some linguists have guessed.
If we know that Yolnir was the name of Odin at that time of the year, I mean, Odin comes in or the name Odin and Yolnir, of course, comes in much later. So I think it's one of two possible explanations that either we have what you said about the festivity, the word for actually partying or feasting.
Yeah.
Because we see today that in Finland, they use the word Jula for to party, to feast or to party.
Oh.
So they actually borrowed a very old Norse word for that, and they say Jula for to party.
Yeah, yeah. And it was also associated with month names. I mean, it would be around our January time, but pretty much all over the Germanic world, there was some sort of month name at that time that had something to do with Yule. I think the earliest one was called Yules. That was in Gothic, so that was in the 300s. We have records of that, and I think that's the earliest record we have. But yeah, of course, it'll be much older than that.
Interestingly enough, the Icelandic word for the month around the winter solstice is actually Ylir. So I think that comes from the same source.
Yeah, yeah.
And but the second explanation would be that it has to do with another Proto-European word, and that later became in Old English whale. So it would mean wheel, or the turning of the wheel and the year and the sun.
Oh.
And that also would make sense, but it's hard to say actually.
Yeah. Linguistics is difficult.
It's either festivities or it means the wheel of the year.
Yep. Both make sense, and that's also the cool thing about linguistics too. Like primitive languages like that, they had such much more meaning to each one of their words. It's not like English or even Scandinavian or most modern day languages. We have to be so specific, one word, one meaning. But back then, a word could have 10 different meanings, and they could all be completely different. But if you go back far enough, it's kind of, you can always see a way that they were related somehow, even though the meanings seem differently.
Yeah, and I mean, since they originally said dricka jul, they said that you drink Yule. I think one doesn't exclude the other. That it could have been both the festivities and something you did, and also the wheel, since you were drinking Yule.
Yeah,
that's what you did.
Yeah.
And
even an old name for an alcoholic beverage, a special beer recipe.
Yeah.
Who knows?
And we also know that the word jolly in English, I mean, this also connects to that it would have something to do with parties and feasting, because if something is jolly, we know that it's positive and it's fun.
Yeah, didn't think about that.
And also the French word joli, meaning beautiful. They also use that instead? I mean, the normal French word for Christmas would be Noël, but they often also use joli. That something is beautiful or jolly. They use that for Christmas too. Yeah, so that definitely comes from Yule.
Yeah, sounds good. Makes sense.
I have a wild card here too, and that is the Zoroastrians. They have their solstice. It's actually the festivities are actually called Yalda. So I wonder if that doesn't come from Yule too. The Yule day became Yalda.
And where is that? Where did you say?
The Zoroastrians, the Persians.
Yeah. Of course, Indo-European people too. If we go back far enough.
So that might be a possibility, but I might be wrong there, because I've also heard that might be an old borrowing word from Aramaic, and that actually it meant something like birth, but I don't know about that. And then we have Lucia.
Santa Lucia Day. See, that I don't know a lot about it either. Only thing I know it's basically a little feast or a party a few weeks before Christmas. I think it's on the 12th or 13th.
It's mainly celebrated in Scandinavia, right?
Yeah, and also, strangely enough, northern Italy. Nowhere else really celebrates it that much. So of course it's a Christian thing, but the reason I would think it's maybe a pagan is because it's celebrated in northern Italy. It means so that would be where the Lombards settled, the Longobards, the Germanic tribe. And if it was celebrated there and not in the rest of Italy, that kind of makes me think that it was originally something Germanic, and then they migrated to Italy, and then of course it changes like it always does, and they gave it a Christian name. But yeah,
it must have had a pagan origin, and then because I mean the saint Lucia in herself, she was from Sicily, right? And then so they must have just, the Christians once again must have just put that on top of the pagan tradition, I guess.
So that's around. It would be around the time maybe of the full moon before the solstice. So that somewhere around that time. So it might line up right. It would definitely possible that was an original Germanic pagan holiday.
The word itself, Lucia comes from lux, the Latin word lux, meaning light. And the story of a young girl bringing light in the midst of darkness, that no doubt held great meaning for people in general, that in the midst of the late December, in the middle of the darkest hour, they were longing for the relief of warmth and light. So that must have been a pagan celebration initially.
Yeah, sure.
Some of the practices associated with the feast of St. Lucy predate the adoption of Christianity in the Scandinavian regions, and that too is, of course, if someone comes and brings the light, that of course connects to that annual struggle between light and darkness, like I mentioned in Ragnarok. So there's definitely something there.
Yeah, seeing it, reading a bit about it there. Yeah, of course, it makes even more sense now.
Sorry, what were you saying?
Yeah, it just makes even more sense now when we speak about the light and bringing it back, and all these other rituals to bring the light back at this time of year. That's now even more sure that it was pagan original.
Yeah, if it was quite fitting that when the Christians saw that, okay, the pagans, they do something here with light in the darkness, let's see if we can find a saint who can do the same thing.
Yeah.
I'm thinking too that this has something to do with that the Christian put it here because we know that the female deities, the matrons and the Norns and the Disir, were celebrated this time of year in some parts of the pagan world. So I think it's why they put the St. Lucy celebration here.
Yep.
Alrighty. Origins. What are the origins of Santa and Santa Claus? That's the next question.
Yeah, that too. I did a video on last week. Funny enough. So Saint Nicholas, of course, it's where the story we're told that he all comes from. But he was, of course, a saint from the Turkey area. At some point, he turned into the jolly, fat, long-bearded Santa that we know today. But if we really look at the first pictures or images that we see of Santa, it's in the Netherlands in the 1700s. So it was called Sinterklaas. And now we're starting to look a whole lot more like Odin. He wasn't fat. He was kind of tall and skinny, but he did have a long beard, and he wore cloaks, but it was green instead of red. So that's at least what the Dutch believed that Santa was at that time, and then he just kind of evolved.
Also, Sinterklaas in Netherlands, he also rides on a white horse over the rooftops, like in the Wild Hunt, with Odin coming on Sleipnir, riding in the Wild Hunt. So that's quite close.
Yeah, and then he gives out gifts too, of course, and does all the other things. And people think that Odin is kind of the origin of Santa Claus. There's plenty of things that suggest that. Of course, in Odin's name Mjolnir and Jólafader, Good Father Christmas. it's just I mean, there's more evidence that Santa Claus, the modern Santa Claus that we know today, comes from Odin than it does Saint Nicholas. Of course, the image of him is looks much more alike. But yeah, the fat old guy in a red suit with a beard, that's kind of developed by the Americans since the 1800s. Probably what they thought Santa Claus was closer to what Sinterklaas was in the Dutch, and also what the image of Odin would be. So that's probably the closest thing we have.
Yeah. I mean, the Santa Claus we have today, that is a mix of so many things. I mean, we have Yolnir, Odin coming riding. I know also that, I mean, the 8 reindeers that Santa has today, and Rudolph and the gang, that might have been a version of the 8-legged horse, Sleipnir.
Yeah.
So the 8 reindeers, they connect to the 8 legs of Sleipnir.
It also kind of suggests if Odin's coming riding on Sleipnir, he only went on Sleipnir when it was his turn to, or if he had to go to different realms. That's what Sleipnir is. It's the slippery one is his name. So it's the force that allows your soul to come in and out of your body. So I'm wondering if there was maybe a ritual of kind of leaving your body behind at this time of year. If we have all these traditions of Santa and the reindeer.
I mean, the very, very origins of this is the Indo-European traditions of shamanism. So we know that, I mean, the anthropomorphic gods we speak about today, they came because it was actually humans dressing up as the gods.
Yeah.
And in this case, it was the shaman of the village. He went from farm to farm, and so they say. Let me put it straight. Some people say that the red and white colors of Santa comes from the fact that the shaman, he ate fly agaric, the red and white mushroom, and so the reindeer, they actually love eating these for us very dangerous mushrooms. And the shaman was actually drinking the reindeer's urine. So he wouldn't be killed by the fly agaric, but he would get super high, and he would the shaman collected these mushrooms under pine trees, because that's where they grow, the Christmas trees as we have today. And he handed these mushrooms out to families to hang them up by the fireplace to be dried. And they then used them for prophetic visions on the morning of winter solstice.
That's amazing.
So that is the very origin of the red and white, that the shaman picked fly agaric mushrooms and handed out to people in the village for prophetic visions.
Yeah, I mean, what else in nature is red and white besides those? Not very much. If the red and white symbolism comes from anything, that's one of the few things it could be.
Exactly. So I think, I mean, that's... and then later on, the village shaman also dressed up as the hooded figure of Odin and Yolnir to distribute. Then it was gifts rather than mushrooms.
Yep. And people forget that. That would be interesting to make a whole episode on that one time, just because a lot of people don't know that humans dressed up as the gods, or what they believe the gods to be, and they use that to kind of again, sympathetic magic to kind of influence nature, but that's a long subject for some sort of.
I mean, it's a very important point, because our gods are not anthropomorphic. That was a result of the fact that to ritualize things and to remember things, they needed to dress up almost like a theater to make a play out of this. So the gods are not anthropomorphic, but we made them look like us.
Yeah, exactly. and it's not even for us to see. It's they don't dress up these things and make up these images in order for us or the surrounding village to see. It's so that nature can kind of perceive it in some way and then react accordingly, like the humans wanted it to.
And I mean, how do you symbolize and interpret gravity or magnetism, etc., and phenomena of nature? I mean, they had to dress up to actually show what nature was all about.
Yeah, absolutely.
So no, Santa is complicated. It's Odin. It's the shaman of the village. It's Sinterklaas of Netherlands. It's Father Winter and King Bore. Many things.
And then Coca-Cola comes in and influences it.
Yeah, always Coca-Cola.
That's been the latest influence.
Yeah. Do you drink in Norway? Do they drink mostly Coca-Cola or Julmust?
Oh, I like Julebus much better. I love that.
Yeah.
I can't get any here. It sucks. That's sad.
Oh, you can't.
No,
I'll have to send you some then.
yeah, that would be nice. I've looked everywhere.
Oh, we had actually forgotten about the Yule goat. I mean, do you know anything about that?
And that's only I don't know where that came from. Of course, the theory is that it comes from Thor's goats. The only kind of connection I can see with that is that, of course, it's a celebration to bring good fertility, and Thor was also associated with good fertility. And of course, traditions around the oak tree around this time, and Thor was also said to be living in the oak trees sometimes, as that's where the lightning would always strike. But I don't know much more than that of where the goats Julebukken might come from.
No, because I mean, initially here in Scandinavia, it wasn't actually Santa Claus who came at Christmas or Yule. It was the goat, Julebocken. And that is quite new that Santa Claus comes at Yule. And the only other thing I know about the Yule goat is that it might come from the Thor's two goats, but also that at Yule time they used to slaughter a goat for fertility and for prosperity.
Yep.
So
it's funny how it maybe evolved there. You have the Dutch who became Christian quite a bit before Scandinavia, but they still had this tradition of kind of Santa Claus or Sinterklaas who looked like Odin, and that lasted up the whole time. But in Scandinavia, they kind of lost that tradition, and instead we had the goat and we had the little nisser, the like little elves come around this Christmas time, but not really any mention of any one that looks like Odin coming at Christmas time. So it's interesting how different countries have preserved different traditions over these times.
That there you actually touch upon something that I find very important about Santa Claus or Tomten. That initially, I mean, the connection between the Santa Claus and Hamingja, because initially the Santa Claus actually was a Nisse who came to the farm, and he did a lot of things, good things for the house and for the farm and for the animals, without anyone knowing about these things. So he was actually doing a lot of invisible things that you never got to know about. And we know that the things you do with the most Hamingja and the most Megin are the things you do without telling anyone.
Yeah.
That you don't brag about, you don't talk about it, you do selfless service without anyone knowing about it. You don't do it out of your ego, and this is something that Santa Claus does. He comes to take care of the house and the people living there, and they don't know even half of the things he's doing.
Yeah. What's the old saying? If you're a good person, help someone and says, "Okay, I'm going to help you, but you owe me back next time." A better person says, "I'll help you, but don't worry about it. I'm just helping you because it's good." But the best people help others and don't even say anything. And that's exactly the same as what you said there.
I find that a very interesting topic, actually, and worth mentioning, with the connection between Hamingja and Santa Claus. And maybe that's also why nowadays Santa Claus asks, are there any good kids here out here? Like when he comes knocking and says, ho, 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 have you been good this year?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So, well, I don't know, but it's an interesting connection.
Yeah.
All right, we have a fifth question. What are the original celebrations and meanings of the ones that grew out of a connection with Christmas and the solstice?
So what this person, I think it was Junie who asked this question, what she was asking is about when Christmas in Scandinavia was changed from the first full moon after the solstice into right around the solstice. I forget if they named it the 25th or if they put it right on the solstice, but that was in Håkon the Good Saga. It was my favorite king, actually, King Håkon from Norway. And he basically, like they always did, they take a holiday, a pagan holiday, but they wanted to Christianize the people, and so they probably changed the dates a little bit to align more with Christian ones and called it a different name. So this happened, and we have basically no evidence that any of the celebrations changed at all after that. It was we don't know a whole lot. Not a lot of it is recorded, but there were feasts. There was sacrifice of the boar. There was lots of drinking, lots of gift giving. They did it to bring fertility. They swore oaths, and I think to the king and the chieftain and Odin, and that's about it. And they did the exact same things after that. Even though Scandinavia was officially Christian, it wasn't really until the time of Saint Olav, almost 100 years later, that he actually started to stop people from doing these things. But people still did them, of course, on a smaller scale, but they weren't allowed to, have a big sacrifice in the middle of the town anymore in the temple and in the hall, but they had to do it on the smaller scale. So that's the only thing that changed. And then at some point, up until we have today, they kind of got rid of a lot of those things, and they had to make it even more secret. And that's why kind of the like obviously out in the open public pagan rituals faded out, but all the other smaller traditions and the symbolism, they stayed. So that's pretty much what happened. It wasn't one specific date that changed it. It was just a slow transition over time.
I interpreted this question a bit more about the dates themselves, like how have things shifted and changed. But we can leave that, actually. I know that the Greeks celebrated something called Halloween at. Maybe that has something to do with Halloween, actually. But Halloween, that was the name of the Winter Solstice festival. It was celebrated in the name of Poseidon. And it was also about renewal. And it's said to have been extremely wild, with a lot of wine and something they called erotic cakes, which sounds very interesting. So apparently the women were extremely wide, and they spent a full night drinking, getting naked, brandishing cakes, carrying huge phalluses, and exchanging saucy banter.
And this was at the same time of year?
Yeah, exactly. It was the Winter Solstice festival. And the men lit a gigantic bonfire and fire lighting that was common to all the solstice. And these celebrations, they continued for several days. 3 days, I think it was. So it was in Greek. In the Greek tradition, it was extremely wild, and that's why the Christians didn't like it at all.
Yeah.
And I think it was the same thing with the Saturnalia of Rome.
Mm-hmm.
So that sounds very interesting. But yeah, that's not really about, since Yule is a Scandinavian and Norse and Germanic tradition that hasn't really anything to do with Yule itself.
Yeah. I'm sure they of course had some celebration on the solstice. We just don't have any clear records of it. Yeah, I mean, in the winter up there, I think even more celebration in the north because there was not much else to do. And of course, they observed the full moons and the solstices. And, you just see even today how many holidays there are in Scandinavia and how many times people take off work. And if you go back 1,000 years, it would be even more so. There are lots of holidays, one every few weeks in some cases, if we look at some of these old calendars, pretty much. So definitely lots of celebration. Just the main ones is what we have records of.
And it's natural. I mean, already the Proto-Europeans, they celebrated this because winter, late winter, or this time of the year was downtime. They had done everything they needed to. They had all the animals in. They had all the food in. The only thing there was actually to tell stories and to drink and eat.
Yeah.
So this is natural, and all the Indo-European people celebrated this time of year. That's for sure. We know that. So it's just, and how similar it was, we don't know, but some traits are the same actually. So that's, yeah, so now I interpreted this a bit more about the dates themselves, but we can leave that actually. And we'll go to we should actually mention that Sharon Turner, who is also in our group, she claims that Yule among the Anglo-Saxons was rather celebrated on the 28th of January, which is actually much later.
Last year it was the 28th of January, but it was very
okay. So it has to do with the moon, right?
Yeah, so it's there's a bit of debate whether it should be the first full moon after the solstice, or if it should be the full moon after the new moon after the solstice. So last year, the full moon was basically, I think it was 2 or 3 days after Christmas is how it lined up. So it could have been late December, but if we do after the new moon, then it ended up being late January. But this year, I think it's like mid-January, something like that. Last year was a strange year that the moons were at a very strange time last year, so that's why that was.
He's made a full video on this on YouTube, so maybe our listeners could and viewers could check that out because it's very interesting. And she also refers to Norse sources like Ynglinga Saga, and she refers to the main bloats of the Norse people.
Yep.
So that's an interesting video too. All right, we have a last question. Question number 6. Some of the cultural differences within the different tribes. What do we have to say there?
Yeah, I'm not sure what he was asking. How much? I guess he's speaking about the Germanic tribes.
I guess so, yeah.
We definitely don't have a lot of records of that. We know that they all did it, like we spoke about before. They all had their month name had something to do with the word Yule. So we know that they all celebrated this, of course. I don't think we have any written records until the Viking Age, actually, and even then, it's not so much information. I know of some differences in Denmark. That was a very, very important one, and they probably celebrated it every year, but every 9 years was a very important one where they had massive sacrifices, even said to be human sacrifices, killing 9 of each species and humans and sacrificing them all. That was at Leyde in Denmark. And Norway, it was just a celebration every year, not so much sacrifice. They would maybe sacrifice one boar, and it was maybe more of a happy time of year from the records we have. And then we have a bit earlier than that, we have records of the Anglo-Saxon Modernit, which we covered already, but we don't know exactly what happened there. Just that was probably in December. And that might be all the records that I can think of, actually. So of course, there would be some differences. in the celebration, but they all celebrate it. We can say that for sure. But yeah, do you know of any others?
I mean, we know that there wasn't one single way of celebrating. That's natural since people live far away from each other. But we do know that in general, it was about light coming back. It was about sacrifices. It was about feasting, since you had all the things back home. And it was about gift giving, because this is a very important aspect of paganism in general, the reciprocity between people and between the gods and between nature and gods and humans, etc. So gift giving, feasting, sacrificing. What else do we have? I know that the Slavic tribes, now that's definitely not the Germanic tribes that he was asking about, but they celebrated something called Kolyada, also a celebration of light, of the ancestors, and the sense of belonging to the local area. They too saw that the veil between the living and the dead was extra thin this time of year. That's also something very typical to all the pagan tribes, that the veil between the divine and the human is thin, both at winter solstice and at summer solstice. So the interesting thing here is that the Slavic word kolo, from kolyada, also means wheel. And koledar in Slavic languages is actually the oldest word we have for calendar. So their word for Yule was kolyada, so that's a mix between wheel, calendar, and dar means giving. So it was actually giving things at this time of year.
Yeah. And was that one at the solstice or at the full
Yeah.
moon?
Everything I mentioned is at the solstice. Yeah.
Yeah. And of course, the Slavic tribes were not super different from the Germanic tribes, especially once you get close to the borders too. That's Eastern Germany, even Poland. Large parts of Poland were Germanic tribes, and of course, you never know how much influence the Goths had in Eastern Europe, which were also Germanic tribes, and they migrated long before and any other, most of the Slavic written records that we have. So of course, there should be some Germanic influence there too.
Yeah, we must assume that at least on continental Europe, there must have been a big exchange of traditions and other things. So, yeah, I mean, for sure, in Poland and other Slavic parts of Europe, must have been quite similar to the Germanic traditions.
Yeah.
If we take the Anglo-Saxons, they were Germanic initially. They had their tradition of wassailing, or however you pronounce that, to wassail something, when you go from house to house and you offer carols and drinks from a bowl. That's also related to the Ragnarök tradition, where they went from farm to farm. And that word comes from Old Norse vesheil, or vesheil, to be well or to be whole. And I know that the carol singing they have in England today comes from wassailing tradition.
Yeah, I think the Celts too had a tradition just like that at the same time. I'm sure I read.
And speaking of the Celts, I know that they sacrificed a white bull. That was very important. And they too gathered mistletoe, since that was related to the sun. And I think that the color white must have had something to do with Balder too. So it was very important that it was a white bull that they sacrificed at Yule. And that's about it what I have on these the cultural differences. I think it was quite different locally, but still with the same features.
Yeah, I think it's we don't have records of these things, but a lot of it is not that difficult to reconstruct if we think about it. And I would love to see people doing that a lot more. I'm assuming this guy is maybe German descent or English, maybe is why he's asking that question. So it's yeah, we can of course.
He has Celtic and Germanic heritage.
Yeah, sure. So it's you can recreate these things easily. Of course, we have sources for the Norse more than most other of the Germanic peoples, but we can kind of just use logic and reason to, decide how the celebrations would have been different. All the key points would be the same probably, but instead of like a boar sacrifice like it would be in Norway, maybe it would be a horse or a cow somewhere else, or maybe instead of gift giving on the second day, it might be at the third day, or things like that. So just everybody knows their own nature and their own environment and their own traditions better than me, and better what the sources can tell us. So these are kinds of things we can reconstruct, and there is no wrong answer as long as there's a logical approach to it, and we have a reason for what we do.
Yeah, and we know that Yule itself was a local interpretation of all winter solstice festivals. I mean, all the pagan peoples celebrated winter solstice, that's for sure. Yule was one of those traditions, and we can say about all the pagan peoples that this is a time of longing for light, basically. So it's about bringing life back. It's a liminal time where the veil is thin between divine, death, and life, and humans. Those are the common features, and then how you choose to celebrate that and to bring light back, that's up to the local tribe, so to say.
Yeah. What would you say are the most important things? If we had to pick three important things that all the tribes maybe shared in common, no matter what they were.
I mean, the most logical thing would be that, I mean, you can do whatever theaters, etc. you want, but the most important was, of course, to survive, to actually have food and to share food and to feel alive at that time of the year when it was damn cold and dark. I would say that the first thing was actually about the feast itself.
Yeah, feast. The date, of course, very important, whether it be on the solstice or the full moon after the solstice. The dates, we can definitely get that right.
And then once again, we know that this is about light. Everybody wanted light and life to come back. They wanted, I mean, this was the birth of the sun. This is the darkest day, but it's also the birth of the sun.
Yeah.
I think that, I mean, we know that they all have this in common. They were longing for light. Maybe that would be my second thing.
Yeah, for sure.
Because we see those traits or those features in all the traditions of longing for light and celebrating light and wanting to bring Balder or Apollon back.
Yeah, fertility and rebirth is also a very important one I would put in.
As always in paganism,
especially at this time of year, that would also be a focus of any tribe at this time of the year. They would have planted the seeds right a couple months ago, and they're germinating in the winter, and now it's time to pray to the gods, do the sacrifices, do whatever it takes to make sure there's a good harvest, that they get a good start to the growth.
I really think that what you're saying now is a very important aspect, because today in our modern society we're quite alienated from nature, so we don't actually understand that now is when it begins. We think like, oh, isn't everything dead at this time of the year? Well, our ancestors, they said, well, today or now is when everything starts.
Yep. It has to. The
That's
seeds need some. They need some dark. They need some cold, and they need some moisture to sprout, to germinate. If you try and plant a seed in the warm sun in the middle of the summer, it's never going to work. It needs to get through the winter to do that anyway. And this is, yeah, of course, something we've lost today, but of humans back then, of course, viewed as very important, even sacred.
We also know that the only reason that our ancestors, our very early ancestors, the very reason they put dead people in the ground was because they had watched seeds grow up from the sound. When they put the seeds in the ground, they grew up and they started living. So the reason why they actually put people in the ground was because they believed that if we do, then they will come back. They will grow back up. And so will I if I die. They thought, okay, if we plant these things, they will come back up. So that's what they did this time of the year. This is when it begins. This is when it comes back. And hence, we have the connection to the ancestors. They wanted to bring them back to kill off the winter.
That's amazing. Yeah, I wanted to ask you about cremation, but we're going a bit long, and we could do a whole nother video on that. But what are your thoughts on cremation versus birth? Yeah, it's too long. It's too long for this video, maybe.
I think we'll hold there, and I think I want to thank you a lot, Michael. And this was really nice. It was a bit, maybe sometimes we were a bit off track, but these are, they are big questions. We don't always know that much about Yule. Unfortunately, it's our task, and it will be our task to bring these things back. And we should also say a very good Yule to you and to our listeners and viewers.
God Yule, everybody. Thank you for having me.